Hello guys, Crispy here, welcome back to another video. In this one, my friends, I'm going to be testing a GeForce RTX 4070 in Horizon Forbidden West. The normal 4070, finally. This one is the Founders Edition model of the card. We are running it with the latest Nvidia drivers that I'm not manually overclocking it. You can see all of its specs right here in Tech Power-Ups. GPU zero resizable bar is also enabled. And over on the left, we're pairing it with a Ryzen 9 7950X3D with half of its cores disabled. So it's basically a Ryzen 7 7800X3D instead. And over on the memory tab, we're using 32GB of DDR5 6000MHz RAM in dual channel. Let's get into it, shall we? And before we go over the settings, I want you to take a look at this VRAM.A and VRAM.U. This stands for the VRAM allocation and VRAM usage, the actual utilization from the game itself. But let's go over the settings now. I'm starting at 1080p resolution, and we're also going to test this one at 1440p and 4K. And I'm using DLAA at the moment, which looks really good in this game. We're also going to try some DLSS and frame generation as usual. And I'm using the highest settings in the game aside from the motion blur, chromatic aberration, and vignette. Oh, and I'm also going to disable the Nvidia reflex over here because that introduces a bit of like micro stuttering on the frame time graph, which is not noticeable, but it's there. So yeah, I prefer to have it off so we have better 1% lows. Now, we're getting around 90 FPS down to 70 frames per second right here, or 75 minimum. That's a little bit underwhelming from the RTX 4070. This is 1080p resolution, guys. I was expecting better coming from this GPU. Did the reflex actually disable? Yes, it's still doing that weird thing on the frame time, as you can see. That's kind of weird. But anyway, this is one of the most intensive areas in the game, and it shows right here. The 4070 can actually perform quite a bit better in other areas, but here it drops by quite a bit. Still, given that this game is very well optimized, it doesn't usually drop a lot of FPS when you increase the resolution to 1440p, the target resolution of the 4070, you know. So hopefully we will still see 60 plus FPS 100% of the time at the 1440p resolution. I'm getting really worried here again because it drops down into the 70s sometimes, and like mid 70s as well. Like 74 is the minimum so far. Yeah, this is a bit unexpected. The power utilization of this GPU is quite low as well, at right around like 170 watts. That's completely normal. That's what I've been seeing with the 4070. It's very power efficient. It rarely goes up to 200 watts of power usage. It will at 4K, all right? But here at 1080p, well, it's a super efficient card, basically. One of the best efficiency GPUs out there at the moment. But I would still stick to something like the RTX 4070 Super. If you're buying a brand new GPU right now, that's a really compelling option. It's around like 20% faster than this one. I think that GPU got around like 110 frames per second average, maybe a little bit more even. Maybe that was with frame generation, like 120 or 130 with FG. But still, we also have FG in this GPU, of course, so if you require more frames than 90 and 74 plus all of the time, feel free to enable that. That's exactly what I'm going to do right now. Also, if you took a look at the VRAM utilization, right now it's below 8GB, so an 8GB GPU would do a fine job in this scenario right here, but back there in the city, it was going up to like 9-ish gigabytes of usage. Now, let's enable frame generation. I don't really need to restart because we didn't really run out of VRAM, really, but I will do it anyways. As you can see, it's working at the moment. We got a pretty decent bump in FPS, and I'm gonna go ahead, quit the game, fully restart the game, and go back to it. Alright, so instead of seeing like 80s and down to 70-ish frames per second in this scenario right here, we're now touching like the high 90s. That's a really good increase in performance coming from frame generation, and in this game, it doesn't feel bad or input laggy whatsoever, which I really like. Also, as you can see, the VRAM utilization, the actual dedicated VRAM that the game is utilizing at the moment, is up to 10 gigabytes almost with that FG enabled, because frame generation does consume quite a bit more VRAM than just native resolution, you know, so that's a trade-off that you gotta make, and that's why I say that the 4060 and 4060 Ti 8GB models, they just kind of suck, because they got this new technology, frame generation, which is pretty awesome. Right now, the image is looking very similar to native 1080p resolution, which is super impressive. This game really works well with frame generation and DLSS as well. And on those lower-end GPUs, it would be awesome to utilize it, but they just ran out of VRAM, in my testing at least. Well, the 4060 did. I didn't test the 4060 Ti yet, but I will, and it will run out of VRAM with the frame generation enabled, unfortunately. And then they start stuttering a little bit more, and the frame time graph is a little bit more inconsistent, and it's just a bad experience from a couple of new generation GPUs that they're selling with frame generation. They're like super proud of the frame generation stuff, which is very nice again, and they advertise it a lot. But on those 8 gig cards, even at 1080p native resolution, if you put FG on top, in many of these new titles, they will consume more than 8 gigabytes of VRAM. Also, there is one thing that looks a little bit worse, and it's noticeable if you look for it. It's the reflections with frame generation. They're a little bit more pixelated, and with DLSS as well. So, but that's the only thing that I can point out about the differences between native and this. FG in this game is just fantastic, especially if you use DLAA as well. Now let's disable the frame generation stuff right now and set it to 1440p, guys. And I will restart the game to reset RAM and VRAM utilizations. And hopefully it's gonna get 60 plus, but I don't know. And here we have it, guys, 60s. Oh, it dips down into the 50s sometimes, unfortunately, with the 4070. That's kind of insane, and I don't know what's happening with that frame time graph. It's a bit weirder than usual, Usually that happens with the reflex on, and it's on right now. Okay, so fair enough. It's on because when you enable frame generation, it just switches itself to on. But if I disable it, it's a little bit better, as you can see, but it's still kind of thick, right? It's not usually like that in other GPUs that I tested. Maybe an update changed something right here. Actually, I know that an update actually increased RAM utilization in this game. It didn't usually touch like 13 gigabytes, 13 and a half previously, especially at the beginning of the benchmark runs that I would do. And now it's consistently touching like 13 gigs after like a couple of minutes or so. So there's that. For example, with the RTX 4070 Super that I tested, the RAM utilization was like around 11.9 gigabytes most of the time, which was a lot lower than this for sure. Now, again, this is a very intensive area. It's not really dropping from 60 FPS, at least not often. We've seen it dip down to like 57 or 59 actually at the beginning, very, very briefly, Right now, it's consistently above 60, which is nice to see, and it is max settings as well, but there's not really much of a difference comparing max settings to high settings in terms of FPS. You gain like 5 frames per second, which would be enough, theoretically, to put it above 60 FPS 100% of the time right here. But again, we're above 60 FPS like 99.5% of the time, so who cares if it dips down to like 59? I don't care, really, and it looks fantastic like this. If you just want that 60 FPS experience, maybe lock it to 60 FPS, add a little bit of VSync, which would be great in this video right now, because since we're hovering around 60 frames per second, sometimes there is quite a bit of screen tearing that is introduced by the capture card, unfortunately. But yeah, if you want that smooth 60 FPS consistent experience, this is gonna deliver it, okay? And it's quite gorgeous at the same time at native 1440p resolution. And if you want to make sure that you don't drop down from 60 FPS at any point in the game, all you need to do is enable that frame generation at 1440p, which again doesn't introduce a lot of input lag in this game for some reason compared to others out there, and you'll have it. You'll have a 60 plus FPS experience all of the time, probably with like 90 frames per second on average, and it won't drop down anywhere. All right, let's try to kill this one. He's struggling a lot for some reason, or maybe I have like special arrows. I don't know. I actually don't know. Oh boy. Okay, still not dropping. 56 FPS, 1% lows, but I don't think it dipped down that much. All right, over here with some effects, it's dropping down into the lower 60s, mid 60s most of the time. So yeah, it's... Oh boy! Oh, I died! Holy crap! Okay. Alright, let's stop it there, guys. And I think we should now enable that frame generation. Let's turn it on right here. And we were getting like upper 70s. Now we're getting 90 frames per second. I'm still gonna restart the game. And we're back here getting 80 FPS. That's quite nice. 77 right there, 78. So basically we're getting what, like 20 more FPS than what we got without the DLSS frame generation. And now it's gonna be at like 70 plus 100% of the time, I guess. Like, if you were worried previously that it would drop from 60 frames per second, you know, like, I saw 59, so I don't want to play with these settings in fear of it dropping. Well, all you need to do, again, is enable that frame generation or DLSS. I will also test it with DLSS without FG in just a little bit. And it's going to be a buttery smooth experience, as you can see. VRAM usage is also under control right there at 10.5 gigabytes-ish. Little stutter. Oh boy, okay. A couple of little stutters there, and I saw the VRAM usage actually dropping down when that happened, and the RAM usage increasing. Could it be running out of VRAM in this particular section of the map? Interesting. All right. That's weird. Maybe it was just a couple of one-offs, but yeah, previously we didn't really touch 14 gigabytes of RAM utilization, right? I believe we didn't, so there's that. Maybe it's not going to be as smooth of an experience as it was with FG at 1080p resolution, or even as smooth as native 1440p. But that will only happen in those settlement areas, you know, villages, towns and stuff, with a lot of stuff going on around you. Out here in the wilderness, where you're going to spend a lot of your time. Oh, a couple of stutters again. Alright, I don't know what's happening here. Frame generation is not really as stable in this area as it is in other areas. Like, if I go over to this section of the map right here, you can see that VRAM usage is quite a bit lower than it was in the other area. And the frame time graph, as a result, is smoother. So maybe it was maxing out 12 gigs in the Burning Shores DLC. That's kind of insane, guys. It's also getting around the same FPS in this area, and this is going to be like 90% of the game, I guess. But the Burning Shores, dude, that is so damn intensive. Alright, the more you play, the more you know, my friends. But hey, again, for 90% of the game, when you're playing the main story, it's gonna be absolutely fine with frame generation enabled. It doesn't even touch like 10 gigabytes around here. So everything's alright. It still looks pretty much the same as native resolution, and that's it. I'm gonna get out of here, go back to Burning Shores, but this time I will disable frame generation, disable reflex right here, and use DLSS Quality instead. And if you are using DLSS Quality and you want the best graphics possible and you feel like the game is quite a bit over sharpened, just go over to the graphics settings and down here to the sharpness and set it to 0. I found that on 0 it looks way better than any other value. So now with DLSS Quality instead of frame generation enabled, visuals at 1440p are very close again to the native resolution stuff. I can see they're a little bit more fuzzy, but the difference is very minimal even in my 42-inch monitor, so unlike a 27-inch 1440p monitor, as long as you keep the sharpness set to 0, it's gonna look absolutely fantastic, pretty much the same as native resolution once again. But now, instead of having more VRAM utilization, or a higher VRAM utilization, you know, we are actually seeing a lower VRAM utilization because DLSS Quality is essentially lowering down the internal resolution and then applying upscaling to make the picture look basically the same as native res here at 1440, as I told you. So that results in pretty much the same FPS, maybe a little bit lower FPS than frame generation, like 2 or 3 less FPS, but it's gonna be 60 plus 100% of the time for sure, and no stuttering issues whatsoever. So previously, approaching this area right here, we would see VRAM usage going up and touching like 10.5 gigabytes and swapping some things into the RAM, and now it's buttery smooth. Frame time doesn't move right there, and the RAM doesn't go up to 14 gigabytes as we saw previously, so nothing is swapping. VRAM usage is completely fine, and if you want to achieve even higher FPS, you could do like frame generation on top of DLSS Quality. Maybe I'll do that actually. And that should also keep it from going up to like 12 gigabytes of usage or actual dedicated VRAM usage. It's also weird because we didn't really see the VRAM usage go up to 12 gigs and touch 12 gigs in this game, yet it swapped anyways. That's something that other people have been telling me about as well. They're seeing the same behavior, seeing that the game doesn't really reach full VRAM utilization, and before it does so, it actually swaps things, which is weird, but well, it's a PlayStation port, so that might have something to do with that. So with all that we've seen and done right here so far, I think I would pick these settings that we're playing on at the moment if I was using the RTX 4070 as my main GPU. This is going to be buttery smooth. Once again, even on a high refresh rate monitor, you will feel those 75 plus FPS all of the time, and you can still have those really awesome looking very high textures in this game, which look fantastic, and the high FPS from frame generation, but without utilizing frame generation. And it also feels just a little bit snappier. Again, I don't really have a problem with the input lag with FG in this particular title, but the native frames are always gonna feel just that little bit snappier. So that's great to see as well. Touching 100 FPS sometimes right here as well. So now I will enable the DLSS frame generation on top of the DLSS quality. And now I can tell quite a bit of a difference, okay? So first of all, running through these flowers right here. Oh my god, okay. Stop please. And the explosions and stuff, they're actually looking a little bit noisier than they used to look like with the DLSS frame generation and DLSS quality separately. But now I can see a bit more pixelation on moving things, and it's just not as pretty really. We do get another 20 FPS of an improvement over what we saw previously with DLSS quality, so that's a 40 FPS improvement roughly over the native resolution. But I mean, with the quality drop off at the moment, unless you have a small monitor and you can't really notice the pixelation issues, I wouldn't do this. That was a little bit of a stutter, but I didn't really restart the game, so let's do that and see if it doesn't stutter inside of town. Yeah, here we have it, 98, 100 frames per second. It's so interesting. Like, DLSS quality gives us 20 FPS and then frame generation gives us exactly the same improvement on top of it. Alright. I guess you can know what to expect here in Horizon Forbidden West. Wow, it's great. Anyway, 10-ish gigabytes of usage at the moment, or actually just 10 gigabytes of usage at the moment, with 11 allocated. And as you can see, still no stuttering issues, but let's go this way and see if it loads up the VRAM a little bit more and the RAM as well as a consequence to that. So over here is where we saw the first stutters happening. Alright, not bad still. A little bit of a weirder frame time graph than previously, like with a few very minor spikes there, but those aren't really noticeable, so that's fine. But yeah, I guess with the DLSS quality and frame generation on top, you're not really going to max out the VRAM and make it swap into the RAM. Again, you don't really max out the VRAM even at native 1440p, but something weird happens with the engine or whatever, and it ends up swapping things anyways. RAM usage is a little bit higher than it was before though, but again, if it doesn't have those really huge spikes anymore, it's absolutely fine. Alright, let's stop it right there and let's play at 4K resolution. Alright, here we have it guys. After a fresh restart of the game, we're at 4K resolution, DLAA, no DLSS frame generation or reflex enabled, very high settings, and it's getting 40-ish frames per second, down into the 30s at times. Ooh. The 6900 XT was quite a bit faster than this GPU. I think that's the last high-end GPU that I tested in this game. And yeah, it was getting like 55 to 60 most of the time in this area. So this one is quite a lot slower, but it's also consuming like half the power of that card. So there's that. And once again, even though this is 4K resolution, we're not seeing the full 200 watts of TGP utilized here in this particular title on the 4070. It's so damn efficient. Like, this is consuming less than an RTX 3060 Ti and getting way higher performance, of course. Like, 3060 Ti could only dream of getting what we saw at 1440p and 1080p, you know? Although it still did a pretty good job at 1080p resolution. Now, yeah, we're seeing like 10 gigabytes almost. Did it swap something there? I don't think so. Maybe it did. I don't know. But yeah, it's going up to like 10 point something gigabytes of VRAM utilization, 13.5 gigabytes of RAM utilization, or RAM allocation, but that's just kind of negligible anyways, because we got 32 gigabytes. It's far from maxing that out, right? And yeah, it's only dropping down into like the high 30s at the worst case scenario at native 4K resolution, and 4K isn't really a resolution that this GPU is targeting, so it's good to see that at least the 12 gigabyte frame buffer is good enough to run it at maxed out settings and 4K resolution without stuttering. But at the same time, it's a little bit disappointing seeing the 4070 not being capable of at least reaching the 6900 XT. But it makes sense because that GPU is closer in performance to the 4070 Super and the 3090, really. And you know what? I'm kind of curious to see what kind of results we get in power utilization if you just lock it to 30 FPS. This is just for science. I wouldn't really prefer to play at 30 FPS than unlocked 40 to 60 FPS all of the time. But yeah, I just want to check it out. Power utilization, it's consuming the same as a 4060, I guess, right? That's kind of insane for the visuals we get once again. If you fancy that console-like experience with quality mode on PS5, it locks it to 30 FPS, but with way better visuals, because this is actually native 4K all of the time with completely maxed out settings. Yeah, this looks great, and it will consume very little power at the same time. But let's unlock the FPS again right here in Riva Tuner, and let's use some DLSS on quality. Right now it's getting 60. Alright, that's quite good. It looks basically the same again as native res. Let's restart. And over here, we're seeing 55. Okay, down into the mid-50s. I think this with DLSS quality is getting around the same FPS as the 6900 XT without any upscaling whatsoever, and the RTX 4070 Super. So that's how much stronger a 4070 Super is than a 4070 normal. Anyway, we're seeing a little bit of stuttering happening right here, which we haven't seen at native res for some reason. Even though DLSS quality uses less VRAM, and even though we're not using or maxing out our full VRAM in this card. RAM usage isn't really up to like 14 gigabytes as previously, so I don't know what's happening there. It just did stutter a little bit. Maybe it's just hit and miss, right? This area is just that intensive. It's not an amazing experience with these FPS, but it's quite a bit smoother. It definitely feels a lot smoother than what we've seen at the native resolution. So there's that. And once again, if you drop the settings, all of the settings down to high, you're going to see like a 5 to 10 FPS improvement. It's not really that big, and it's not big enough to put it at native resolution above 60 FPS for sure, or even 60 average. So yeah, you're better off just utilizing some upscalers since they look so great here in this game. At least DLSS and frame generation do. Obviously, at 4K, I would definitely avoid using frame generation because it's going to max out the VRAM inevitably. Now, let's use DLSS Balanced, actually. All right, let's check it out around here. So we gained like 6 FPS, I think. We were seeing 60 FPS in this direction. Start counting our FPS again. I'm not going to restart this because we haven't really maxed out the RAM or the VRAM usages, so it won't really do much. It gets pretty much the same FPS if I don't restart, and I'm only playing around with DLSS qualities and stuff. So there's that. And 59 FPS sometimes, it dips to that over here. So balanced DLSS is still not enough to put us above 60 FPS all of the time, although it is enough to put the average FPS above 60 FPS all of the time. Talking about the quality of balanced DLSS, it's really close to quality, guys. It might be slightly softer here and there, but it is negligible on a 42-inch monitor. So if you are on a 32-inch or 27-inch 4K panel, it's going to be even more negligible, and you can definitely play like that if you wish. Also, you're only going to see those drops into the 50s with balanced DLSS in town areas. As you can see around here, we're getting 70s. well above 60 FPS all of the time, and it's going to be much smoother as well, with 69 average at the end of it. Look at that, beautiful stuff. Right, little stutter right there, but it was nothing. All right, it is overall a smooth experience and still a gorgeous one. But let's see what it can do with performance DLSS, because this is 4K, guys, so performance DLSS still looks pretty damn good. It's just that, again, if you look in that reflection right there, yeah, if I zoom out especially, you can see that it's quite pixelated, right? You can see the little squares here and there, and that's the thing that I've been telling you about with the DLSS here at 4K or any other resolution. That's what DLSS does to the image, that it's quite noticeable compared to native resolution. But still, it's minor. Once again, who cares, really? This is looking really good, guys. The game is basically rendering at 1080p, a fourth of a resolution of 4K, yet it is looking close to native 4K. I'm not gonna say it's the same as native 4K, because it isn't right now. Quality DLSS was very close and basically the same. This has a little bit of more noise to the image. I'm not even sure if I can call it noise. It's just softer overall and fuzzier. Just a tiny bit. It's very small. It's like you added a little bit of sharpening after you upscaled the image, which is probably what it's doing, even though the sharpening is set to the minimum here in this game. Yeah, 14 gigabytes of RAM usage. I guess it's starting to have a little bit of trouble here because of the memory leak issue in this game, so we probably need to restart it. That's something that you will encounter if you just keep playing the game for like half an hour, and so on. The RAM usage is going to go up and up and up, and it's going to become a little bit less stable as time goes on, unfortunately. But anyways, I'm back here, just restarted completely, and now with performance DLSS, oh yes, it definitely feels very smooth right now, guys, with 70-ish FPS, basically down to like the high 60s at the minimum. And I think if I was playing at 4K resolution with the RTX 4070, I would choose these settings. It just looks that good to me. Hair is a little bit soft, it loses a little bit of detail while it's moving like this because of DLSS performance, but it's really minor. Like DLSS performance in this game, it looks better than quality FSR at 4K. Okay? That's how insane DLSS is in this particular title. It works really well. You know what? I would probably end up using VSync here, or just lock it to 60 FPS while using G-Sync if you have a G-Sync monitor, and play like this, because it will look fantastic. It will never drop down from 60 FPS. It will smooth out those frame times as well, getting a little bit less stuttering issues over time, and it's gonna be super stable. So lastly, I guess we should probably try it with DLSS frame generation here, performance DLSS at the same time. It definitely becomes quite a bit pixelated, especially on the hair. I can notice that, so I wouldn't really use these settings. Maybe like quality DLSS with frame generation at the same time will give us very good visuals, but it gives us like 60 FPS or so, and it's already swapping things into the RAM, but we need to restart, of course, so I'm gonna do that. This is just for science purposes. I'm wondering what kind of VRAM utilization we'll see here, and VRAM swapping things into RAM. Yeah, 13.8 gigabytes of RAM usage, so it's already started swapping some things, even though the utilization doesn't max out. Again, it just swaps things, okay? It is 60 plus FPS all of the time. It is close visually to performance DLSS, actually. Maybe a little bit better than performance DLSS, because DLSS is still on quality right here, of course. But yeah, you can see that RAM utilization instantly starts moving up right there. And we should start seeing a little bit of stuttering in just a little bit, just like we saw at native resolution 1440p with DLSS frame generation enabled. Yeah, a little bit of inconsistency on the frame time right there. Once again. Yeah, not as bad as previously. Well, now it's starting to do that. And the RAM usage is starting to go up as well. So it's a little bit meh. It is going to work very well in 90% of the game, once again, when the VRAM isn't really maxing out, but here in these towns of the Burning Shores area, it's just way more VRAM intensive, and intensive overall, where it actually starts dropping a little bit and swapping things. So yeah, that's been it. Thanks very much for watching. I hope this was informative to you guys. A lot of you were asking for the RTX 4070 vanilla version, so here it is. Hope you guys enjoyed. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one very soon. Love you all. Bye-bye.